Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to a demo that I'm doing on how to create a use case diagram, or in this case, diagrams, because I'm going to do two, using Visio 2013. And I'm going to address both the method of expressing a problem as a use case and the mechanics of using Visio 2013. So even those of you who, for one reason or other, can't use the Visio product may want to watch the rest of the demo to get the approach down. And then if you're using a Dia or a visual paradigm or it's something that runs on your Mac or runs on your Linux operating system, at least you'll have the approach down, okay? So I have down here in my taskbar first of all, what are we looking at? We're looking at a virtual machine of 64-bit Windows 7 that's running on my MacBook Pro. So, but the experience is usually pretty much like the real thing. So I think you can follow along with confidence. And down in my taskbar, I've got a way to start. I have an icon for Visio 2013 that keeps me from having to go over to the start icon. And so I'm going to cheat and do that. So that's going to open up Visio 2013. And if we go to the product here, there's usually a list of templates that we want to use, okay? And sometimes we get recent ones that we use. Now, just a few minutes ago, I did a little bit of practicing with the template from the UML use case. So it's here in this frequently used area, but you probably won't get that. So you'll probably want to go down and do software and database, which is a whole category of templates. And you'll pick that. And then not in the top of that, but somewhere down, there's a lot of UML related diagrams. They have UML use case. So I click on this, and the default is US units for the size of things. That works fine. And I click on the create button. And I get this. Now, the last of the diagrams that I created on here was a data flow diagram. And I typically like to do those in the portrait orientation. And so I'm still in the portrait orientation. Whereas I think that use case diagrams work well in I'm sorry, I said it the wrong way. I'm in the landscape orientation because data flow diagrams work well in the landscape orientation. And I really want to be in the portrait orientation for a use case diagram because they're typically tall and thin. So I'm going to go up to design, click on that in the menu, and then on the very left side of the toolbar is orientation. I'm going to pick portrait. And now I've got the portrait orientation. Okay, and as I mentioned in the lecture, if you have a system of any size, you need to, it's going to be very hard to get all of the use cases for one system on a diagram. And so UML, the Unified Modeling Language, has a concept called a package, which is a collection of things. And so a particular use case diagram is either for the whole system or a subset called a package. Now, in this particular Visio template, we call it a subsystem. All right, that's not the UML term. The UML term is package. Okay, and we pull that, we're going to take that and pull it on. And where we want to have this is we want to have room for the actors on the outside and their labels. And we don't really need any extra room at the top or the bottom. So I'm going to come down here, and now I'm going to pull the right side in so I've got room for a second set of actors on the right side. And it looks something like that. And if I click off of it, now we'll see what we need. Okay? Now, what problem am I going to do? Well, I want to do one that where you'll be familiar with the application. So I'm going to do a bank ATM application because most of us use a bank ATM application. We sort of understand the way it works. So we're going to now see how that might be depicted in a use case diagram. Okay? And again, I'm not going to get the opportunity to put all the use cases in in a single diagram because I want to show you how to create two. And what I want to do is I want to separate them into what I'm going to call business use cases and administrative use cases. And this is a separation that works well if you're just going to have two. The business ones are the ones that relate most directly to the primary user or customer. And the administrative ones are the housekeeping-oriented things that don't really involve the customer directly and create value directly for the customer, but do so indirectly. Okay, and there's all kinds of schemes you can use for packaging. Typically, what you want to do is you want to select use cases to put on a diagram that are going to be reviewed with the same group of users and stakeholders. Okay, so I'm going to go up here to name and double click, and I'm going to call this business use cases. Okay. And I've got that. And let's see, what kind of a theme have I got? It looks like if I go up to the toolbar, I have a green and blue theme. Let's try a red and gray theme. See how that looks. Just because I'd like to be different than the ones that I did before. Okay? So now what we have is we have a palette of shapes on the left side, and we want to pull them in. So let's think about what the primary actor is, the main actor in a ATM use case. So first of all, you want to look for actors. Okay. Now, if you've already done a context diagram, which I don't have available to show you here, well, that would be a great place to start. Okay, that's the reason that I had people do the context diagram. So the main actor in using an ATM is the customer of the bank, okay, the account holder. But in general terms, let's just call them the customer. So we're going to take this actor symbol and pull it out here. All right, and all the use cases on this sheet are going to be associated with the customer. And usually when you want to label it, you do a double click. And there's no difference here. So we're going to say customer like that. And for right now, we'll leave the size of the type as it is. Okay. And so what are the things that a customer can do to create value for herself or himself with an ATM system? Well, they can make a deposit, they can make a withdrawal, or they can check their balance, or maybe they're going to transfer funds. So let's think of three things. They want to transfer between checking and savings, or savings and checking. Okay. So let's pull out 4 use case shapes. 1, 2. I like the little things that pop up on the diagrammer that allow you to see that they're lined up horizontally. So that's kind of nice. 3, 4. Okay. And let's double click on the first one. And let's say typically the first thing that we're going to do is withdraw cash. Okay. And the second thing that we're going to do, the second use case, again, this is going to be in a verb object phrase. We're going to deposit, and it's either cash or check. So let's say funds. Okay, so that's a term that will allow us to do either. The third is we want to display the balance of one of our accounts. Okay, so we'll double click on that and we'll say display balance. Okay. And the last one we said we were going to transfer funds. And implicit in this is between the accounts that we have that are at this bank and that are associated with this account. Okay? Now, we have a customer who's associated with these 4 use cases. Do we have any other actors? Well, typically when you do this kind of problem, because of the history of the way systems were developed at banks, there is a main banking system that did not originally work with ATMs. It originally worked with human tellers. And so what they had in that system, it was on some kind of a mainframe computer or something like that, is that they had that. And so they used that as sort of the back end for the ATM system. So let's take an actor and put them over on the right side. And it shows we're lined up. Well, we were there for a second. And let's call it the main banking system. Okay, so an actor is either a person acting in some role, like customer, or it's the name of a system that our system interacts with. All right, so how do we associate these things? Well, we use this association line. So we pull it out, and we touch it to the customer icon till it lights up, and then we let go. And then we pull the other end up into the use case ellipse that we want, and then it lights up and we let go. And then we click off of it and we see the line between those two. Now what that says is that the customer interacts with the withdrawal cash use case. That's all that it says. It doesn't say how. It doesn't say what data or material is going to flow during the use case, although if we're familiar with this kind of transaction, we probably know that the data is going to be things like account number and password and stuff like that. And the material is going to be something like cash coming back. But we can't tell that from the diagram. So the diagram is not a data flow. It's just a statement that this actor is associated with this use case. That's all it says. It's very minimal statement, okay? And we're also going to say that here, the main banking system, we drag that out, attach it, and drop it, is also associated with the use case because our system, which is the ATM system, is going to talk to the main banking system to see if we have available cash to withdraw, and then to take the money out of our account if we do, in fact, take out a cash withdrawal. And so this is going to be true of all four of these. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly do four associations like this. Okay. And if you're a good listener, you can hear a lawnmower going in the background here. And it doesn't take a lot of thought power to realize that I'm not the guy running it. So maybe that's a good thing. So transfer funds is hooked up, and now I'm going to go to the other side. And again, you can do them in the other order. Here, we hooked it to the use case first and then the actor. That works equally well. And in this particular diagram, I think it does a pretty good job of attaching these kinds of lines to these kinds of icons. So when we were doing the data flow diagrams with Visio, it wasn't quite so cooperative. Okay, and I see that the boundary line is a little closer on one side than the other, so I'll kind of expand that a little to make it more balanced. And that's my whole diagram. Okay? So what I'm going to do to this is I'm going to save it. So go up to the menu and I'll click on File, Save As. And I'm going to put it on this computer. And I'm going to put it under someplace, Systems Analysis, I think. And I'm going to put this under Demos. And let's just call this Business Use Cases. Okay, and we're going to save. That's a Visio drawing. That's the type. And I'm going to come along right after that and do another save as in order to make a PDF, because I'm going to want to include this in my report, and I'm going to want a PDF instead of a Visio drawing file. So I just go down and say the file type is PDF and put it in the same directory. And now I've got a beautiful PDF here. Okay, and I've got I'll have two PDFs, and I'm going to show you how I merge them on my Mac, and you may do a similar thing with similar tools on Windows if you want. But we'll see how that goes. Okay, so let's close that. And let's start to think about administrative use cases. So let me get rid of this thing here. Get rid of the diagram too. And let's go up to the menu and say we want a new. And what do we want? Well, I'm going to go ahead. If you're following along with me, you probably have UML use case right in the sort of recently used category. So I'm going to click on that, pick US units, which is the default, and click on create. And now apparently the default is this landscape look. So let's change that. Let's go to design and orientation and say we want portrait. And the design that we have is that kind of red and gray kind of look, which is good. So now we want to pull out this system boundary, which is labeled as subsystem here. And we want to do about the same thing. We want to leave enough room for actors on the side. And then we'll have the use cases in the middle. And again, it's kind of misbehaved for us. So we'll pull it all the way down to the bottom line. And now we'll pull the right side back to have about the same amount of room on the left and the right. Okay, so what kind of things have to be done that are more, and we need to name it. So let's call this administrative use cases. Sometimes this kind of packaging is used in order to between the business and the administrative, in order to be able to show the users the use cases that they're the most interested in, and then to be able to show them the ones that are more kind of common garden things that have to go on that are the administrivia of the system. Okay, so let's think of what the use cases are that support the system. Okay, so one of the things that we need to do is that we need to authorize customers to use the ATM. Okay, so let's think about that. Call that authorized customer. That's probably a combination of making sure that they have a card associated with their account and making sure that they have a PIN associated with the card, and that that we know how to use that, right? The customer probably needs, before they do any of the use cases that we saw on the other side, they probably need to be able to log into the ATM. Okay, so this is something that the customer would do. Log in to ATM. Okay, that's a customer use case. It's a pain in the butt to the customer, but it has to be done. And the third thing that I could think that has to be done on a regular basis at a ATM is to restock the cash in the ATM, because most people go to ATMs to withdraw cash. And usually there's a truck that comes at some kind of safe time of day and restocks the cash. Okay, so who would the actors be in this? Okay, so let's say that any banker who works at the bank can authorize a customer to use the ATM system. So what I would do is I would pull an actor over here, and I'd give them the actor name of banker. Now, this is pretty wide role. A lot of people could be given the permission to act in that role. Logging into the ATM is something that the customer does. So let's line up the customer about right here. Okay. They're right there. That's nice. And I see now that we're not really in the color scheme that I thought. So I'm going to go up to the design and click on the color scheme that I liked, just to be consistent with the other diagram. Okay. And in restocking the cache, we probably have an actor who drives a cash truck. Let's call this role ATM restocker. Okay. So obviously, if we're going to allow a person to open up the back of the ATM and get at all the cash, they probably have to have a high level of clearance. So let's look at the associations. Authorized customer is participated in by a banker. Okay. Now, sometimes when we authorize a customer, we have the customer key in their PIN and then the banker doesn't see it. I know that happens at my bank. If that's the case, then we have two actors involved in the use case. And let's just say that that's the way it works at this bank too. Okay. Now, what order do they interact with the use case in? How much activity do they have in the use case? You can't tell from here. You have to go read the specification for the use case to see what they do, when they do it, how often that they're doing things. Just isn't enough information here. This is a thing to review with a user group and say, well, here's how you're going to be involved in the system. Okay. Now, logging into the ATM is something that we're going to leave for the customer to do. Okay. And just the customer. They don't need a banker to do that or an ATM restocker to do that. And restocking the cache, we're going to leave that for the restocker to do. And they're not going to need anybody else either. Okay? Well, let's think ahead. Okay, let's just show how we might change things here. I just realized that for the banker to authorize the customer, they probably have to log into the banking system. So let's show that just to be a little just to show us how we might change these things. And so what's interesting here is all of a sudden we got this extra line that we didn't want. I don't know why, but I'm just going to highlight it. I clicked on it and I'm going to hit the delete button, delete key, and that's it. And then let's take logging into the ATM, pull that down a bit. Okay, and that worked fine. We didn't get any extra connections there. All right, now let's have a use case. And let's say this is going to be logging into the main banking system. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. And this is a use case that the banker will have to perform before they're able to authorize a new user. So we'll connect that to the banker. Okay, that's not something that the user has to do. And that's it. Okay, so now we've got use cases that for the most part are administrative. They don't create a lot of immediate value for people. They just allow the cases that we kind of package together on the other diagrams. They set the stage for those to be ready to run and work, for the cash machine to be well stocked, for the customer to be authorized, and everything ready to go. But they're more kind of pain in the butt things than they are main things that the customers are interested in. So this way of dividing up the use cases is pretty popular, and one that I like. Again, it really depends on how many you need to package. You can usually get, here we put 4 on each, you can easily get, say, 6. When you get 8, it starts to get busy. When you get 10, it gets way too busy. Now, you also will notice that I don't have any relationships between the use cases. I'm not using any extends or includes, okay? And he did that really intentionally, okay? Because you can think of these kinds of things that are going on, particularly the customer's interaction with the ATM. You could think that there'd probably be some common screens that they would go to no matter what they're doing, and menus that they would see. But those are all the details of the user interface, and they're not really part of the requirements per se. And we can design them when we get to, say, physical design of the system. And we really want to allow the designers the latitude to do that when the time comes, consistent with the ATMs that are being deployed in the system. What we're not trying to do is to write program specifications here. So we only want to, say, use an include and share part of the requirements if, in fact, there are requirements that are in common. And the only common requirement that we have here is that the customer has to log into the ATM. And each of the use cases on the other diagrams as a precondition to running the use case, they each will say that the customer will have to have successfully run the login to ATM use case. So we can do this without any includes, extends, any of those things. And I really recommend that you take that kind of approach. Okay, so why don't we save this? And we're going to save this on our computer in the demos. And we're going to call this administrative use cases. Okay, so we've got that. And what's funny is we seem to be saving this as a Visio drawing. Oh yeah, Visio drawing first. And then we want to save it again. I'm going to say File, Save As, and we'll go to the same place, and we'll save it as a PDF. And that should come up as a PDF. All right. And, Visio with each new version has done a better and better job of these UML-based diagrams. And I think they're kind of pretty. And one thing I like about the diagram here is that the size of the type, without having to manipulate it, is just about right. Okay, now we've got the two PDFs. If we wanted to combine them, the tool that I use is I've got Adobe Acrobat Pro, which in my setup here is a Mac application. So I'm not going to show you combining the pages, but it's really easy to do with Adobe Acrobat Pro. Another thing that people do is that they take a Word document and they pull the PDFs into that, and they use that as a way to combine them. And there are other tools other than Adobe Acrobat Pro that it can be used to take a long assortment of PDFs and to combine them and to put them into order. And that's the kind of thing that you're going to have to do for your project report. Okay, and anybody who needs some extra help on those kinds of things can contact me directly. So that's the approach to coming up with a use case diagram, including the approach to identifying the actors and the use cases. It's a little bit too easy here because we know this so well. You know, I've been withdrawing cash from ATMs for 30 years, and I'm sure that you have been withdrawing cash and making deposits and stuff from ATMs for quite a while yourselves, depending upon your individual age. And so we have a pretty good idea of how it works. So it's easy to identify the actors, and it's easy to identify the use cases. This whole idea of trying to package it into, say, the business use cases and the administrative use cases is sort of an add-on. Admittedly, it's more challenging when we're working with a new system area. Okay, here the actors just kind of fell right out because we know what a customer is. We know what a banker is. When we're trying to do something like, say, the iSchool's web store, we probably know what a customer is, but we're not really sure what the roles are within the web store personnel. And maybe if we had people to talk to, we could go and ask them what the roles are going to be and how they're going to organize. But if we're doing this as a class assignment, we might have to make some assumptions. Okay, and so that's what you have to do. The thing to remember is that the actors don't represent individual people like Tom and Fred, and they don't represent job titles either, like vice president of the bank or something like that, or cash truck driver one. But they represent some kind of a role that somebody is going to play with regard to our system. And we're saying that really anybody who's going to play the role of a banker can authorize a customer. And down here at the bottom, we're saying that anybody who can play the role of ATM restocker is able to restock the cash. Now, I just want to point out what's not in these diagrams. Let me make the scale a little bit smaller so you can see the whole diagram at one time. Okay, that's it. So we can see the whole diagram. There's no data flow. Okay, so you will notice that there is nothing that tells you how these use cases are related to each other, how the data gets into the system. We assume it gets into the system through some kind of interaction. So those relationship those association lines implicitly say there's probably going to be some kind of data flow. But exactly what flows in what direction when, there are no details on that. And there especially are no details of what happens internally with the system. So the only thing that we see are the externals of the system. There might be all kinds of internal data flows and processes that go on in order to make this user interface possible, okay? They just don't have a place on a use case diagram. A use case diagram describes what the system looks like internally. And the other thing to remember is that use case wise, we're only going to include use cases that are supported within the scope of the automated system that we're creating. Okay, so in the textbook, there was a use case where a manager was hiring an employee. And in the old world, we probably would not have had that as a use case in an automated system. Nowadays, when most employers want the applicant to submit their application online, and the manager or their delegate gets a copy of the applications and the resumes from the online system, well, then I think that's a legitimate use case for some kind of automated system. Okay, so to the extent that these actors are going to do manual things that are not going to be supported in the system, there's not going to be a use case for them. Okay, there's only a use case for the things that the system actively supports. And so that's why the boundary line is, again, kind of like the context diagram. Things that are outside of the boundary line are outside of the system, and they're not part of the scope of the automated system. And sometimes it's easy to get carried away when you're thinking of either activities that the people outside the system are going to also do that are not supported by the automated system, or it's easy to get carried away to start to think, well, how are the internals of the system going to work? How's the data going to flow? Are there data stores? Are there any kind of stuff? With respect to that, in use case diagrams, we don't care. We are only explaining which user roles interact with which use cases. And a lot like the context diagrams in data flow diagram, what you see is what you get. So all of the functionality that's part of the system is in one use case or other. Okay? Even if it's a little administrative kind of thing, like logging into the main banking system and authorizing the customer. Okay? We have use cases for each of those. There's no hidden functionality. There's no functionality too small to diagram and then put into some kind of package on some use case diagram. So all in my lecture with regard to use cases, I thought of all the functionality of the system as water that's in a pitcher, and the use cases are, to me, they look like water balloons that are kind of laid down on the table and they've kind of squished, right? And so what you have to think is that what you're doing is you're taking all the functionality and you're pouring it into one water balloon or other. And if you fill up all the balloons that you have and you still have some system functionality that's left in the pitcher, then you have to decide, do I need more use cases, or is this functionality that we really don't need in the system, in which case we're going to pour it down the drain. But if it's something that this system does, then we are are going to have a use case for it. And if it's not here, it doesn't get done. Okay, so you should have enough information to do your use case diagram. And I'm going to say goodbye now until I see you again in the discussion of use case specification documents. Bye-bye.